All right, so hope everybody had a lovely Connect time. Now we've got a guest speaker today. He may not be unfamiliar to you at this point, Mr. Dale Bacon, the head honcho of small groups here at Shadow Mountain Community Church. You give him a hand for that, because he's gone a little wild and crazy recently with a big push to get everybody in small groups. So he's going to go pass out on vacation for a week or something. Yeah, nice. I do have a question for him, since we're talking anxiety and fear all weekend here at Shadow Mountain, because it's fun and exciting. I heard a rumor about you, and I don't know if this is true or not. Do you not like bacon?
I do not like bacon.
Go now. I'm sad to learn that that's true.
I'm sorry to do.
All right, come on up, I guess. Dale Bacon, everybody.
Hey guys, it's good to be here. And yeah, I don't like bacon for a few reasons. One, I don't like crunchy things for breakfast. I prefer more softer, malleable things. So that's one. And secondly, I actually do come from pig farmers, and I've seen how that all works. And yeah, I've worked in that arena for a little while. So when I say I don't like bacon, there's some other reasons to it. So. But it's good to be here, and I talked to George this week. We were brainstorming on what might be appropriate for me to come in and share, and I had thrown out a few ideas, and he'd thrown out a few ideas, and we landed on fear. And this is George asking me to help you. So I hope that what I bring today, what we discuss and explore, helps you as you're navigating whatever fear might be going on in your lives. I've had fear in my lives many, many different times, and I continue to face fear on into my life. So it's gonna be a part of your life, and that's not supposed to be a downer. It's supposed to be a realistic thing. Both the positive emotions like happiness and joy and excitement and all those, and then some of the more lower grade emotions that we don't always enjoy: sadness, despair, depression, fear. That's a part of the journey of how we navigate life. The good news is God doesn't leave us alone. He actually equips us and gives us what we need in times of fear. And a part of what I'm going to give you today is that equipping piece, both what the Bible teaches and then what I've learned that agrees with the Bible. And so one is I'm going to make it a highly interactive morning, meaning normally, as I understand it, you guys have sort of a lesson time and then a discussion time. Today we're going to have lesson discussion, sort of back and forth. One of the things that I've learned as I've studied brain research, that's one of my things, is the brain actually learns more in discussion than it does in information. So you take information, discuss it, and then come back, take more information, discuss it. I also want to appeal to you to wherever God may be leading you. Because generally speaking, fear comes with God's leading. It's just a part of the dynamic of spiritual life. As God is saying, hey, I want you to go here, I want you to do this, whatever that is, we almost always have a resistance. It's not always fear. Sometimes it can go into rebellion or resistance. But for today's purposes, we want to look at fear. So there's an interactive question actually on the back page of your form, where it says discussion questions, select one or two to discuss at time allows. The first question is, what is the most expensive price that you've paid for giving into fear? What made you get into it? So the first question I have is, have you guys done that question already? It's my understanding that you did the other questions first. Okay, great. I only want to take a few minutes, 2 to 3 minutes on this. So the idea is jump in as opposed to kind of work all the way around. But again, the question, what is the most expensive price that you've paid for giving into fear? What made you get into it? Now, as you're thinking, I'm going to give you a few, one price that I've paid, and then when we come back, I'll give you a couple other examples. Have you guys ever gone to those, I don't know what they call them now, initiatives or trust fall type things where you join a group, and this used to be really big in the work world, and church kind of did it too, and sometimes they still do it at church camp. Ropes courses, have you done those? Well, so the idea is there's some kind of challenge that you have to move through, but you have to rely on other people to do it. And I went to a church camp week one year. I used to be a youth pastor, and all the kids were doing this thing. And it was, you were on a telephone pole. You climbed this telephone pole, and there was a platform at the top of this telephone pole, and then they hooked you up to like a rappelling kind of gear thing, so you know if you fell. And then you had to jump from one telephone pole to another. It was maybe 5 feet from one to the other, but you were at the top of a real telephone pole. It was high. And I was watching all the kids in my group do it, and they seemed absolutely fearless. Like they'd climb up, they'd put their harness on, boom, and they'd jump. And nobody fell. But I was in charge of all those kids, and something happens when you're responsible for other people. And I don't know why, but fear just kind of kicked up. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to push through fear. That was my goal. So I got all the way to the top, and my hands are shaking. Like I'm nervous. And I'm looking down, and I've always had a fear of heights. And so that didn't help at all. And then they put the harness on me, and I'm looking, and you may have had this experience where 5 feet becomes like 50 feet because of the nerves and the fear. And I locked up, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't. I was like, take the harness off, and I climbed back down that telephone pole, and I couldn't do it. So here's that's one of mine. Now I don't know if it's the most expensive, but what it did to me is it normalized cowardice. Now it didn't normalize it at a big percentage. Let's say it added like 2 or 3% to my internal coward. We all have internal cowards. There are parts of our lives where we're just like, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to do that. I'm backing away. And it told me, hey, there's now more reason to be afraid than there is to be bold or confident or be able to take a risk. So that's something of what I'm asking of you. It doesn't have to be this kind of crazy jump from one telephone pole to the other. But the idea is, when has this idea of paying a price for being afraid? What's it cost you? So go ahead. Got about 30 more seconds on this. All right, if we can come back together, we'll keep moving forward. So hopefully in this short discussion time, maybe you also had shared a bit of your story where you've responded or faced fear. And we all do it differently. We all do it at different levels. We all do it with different emotions and different kind of grades of emotions. Sometimes it's very high. Sometimes it's very low. But I want to tell you a story that's a lot more kind of current to my life here. I was terrified to come to work here. Terrified. I wasn't a minister at the time. I wasn't a pastor. I wasn't involved in church work in any way. I was a small group leader. and I'd met a guy who was the pastor of the small groups. We were friends. And I didn't know that for the year that we got to know each other really well was my interview. I had no idea that he was considering me to come to work with him. But I had kind of sworn off church work. I'd done it for a while and said, I'm good. I was a pastor's son. I grew up always getting into trouble. I just didn't see how a guy who was trouble prone could do much work in a church setting. But he believed in me. He saw something in me, and he said, I want you to come work with me. I think God's got a call on your heart. That part I knew. I had heard it, and like I said earlier, I had rejected it. It was just too scary of a thought. And so my response to this one was because of him, because he said he believed that I could come in and do something that would help the church. That's why I took the job. I didn't take the job because I had this, I'm so good at this, and I'm so confident. I was actually very, very nervous and scared. And so sometimes we do that, right? We push through. But I want to read the passage of Scripture that's in your notes section, so you can open up those notes. The key Bible passage I want to talk about is, it's Jeremiah 23:4. I will place shepherds over them who will tend them, and they will no longer be afraid or terrified, nor will anything be missing, declares the Lord. Let me pray over this passage and over our time, and then we'll jump back in. God, thank you again for this morning. Thank you for the ears and the eyes and the hearts that are in this room, that we can discuss something that is so common to everybody. And yet you say, I can help with that. In fact, I can take fear and replace it with something else. And so I pray today, as we're each navigating our own journeys of fear, that you, God, would come in and give us clarity, give us inspiration, give us motivation to take those steps of faith that we may be resistant to at this point. In Jesus' name, amen. So I said earlier I want to talk about like leadership and fear, and one of the things about this passage, it gives two thoughts to kind of your world that I think of. One is you have shepherds. So I serve as a shepherd here at the church. George serves as a shepherd here at the church. If you were at the service this morning, you heard Rob talk about what he talked about, and that's a shepherding dynamic. But if you notice the passage, I will place shepherds over them who will tend them, and they will no longer be afraid. And so I want you to think about a second generation of leadership that comes from that primary. In a church setting, typically pastors, sometimes they're called ministers or elders, but they serve as that primary piece in the church of shepherding. But the goal of the shepherd, ironically, is to look around and say, who else are shepherds? Who else are leaders? And so as you're moving through this, I want to add a dimension, not just facing fear, not just following God, but responding to the need for leaders. Every church is generationally built. It's not built static, meaning the guy who's the leader is not always the leader. That person will serve his or her time, and then that person will move on. The idea is who's going to grow up in that space. And so that may be a piece of your journey, or today you may wake up to that question, what's my leadership role? Either in the church, or it could be in your home. I know a few of you are married in here. It could be in your marriage or as a parent. It could be at school or work. But the idea is, where is God calling me to step up a little bit more, maybe that I'm comfortable doing? I'm not saying a lot. I'm saying a little, because leadership is incremental. And so be thinking about that as we kind of wrestle through what we're doing here. The definition of fear, so if you write this down, real simple. Fear is defined as a sense of impending danger. A sense of impending danger, external or internal. A sense of impending danger, external or internal. Let's start with internal. The way that this happens, fear kind of happens internally, is it's kind of connected to shame, another emotional word that we don't like to talk about. But the idea is there's something in me that's not quite right. I'm not quite up to the task. I'm not the right person. I'm not strong enough. I'm not smart enough. But the idea is we discount. There's a voice inside of us that says, no, that's not you. And it could be also some of our less than desirable character traits. Maybe we have some trouble with anger or aggression, or maybe we aren't good at getting our needs met. That's one of the big challenges of being a pastor. Statistically, as they study pastoral whatever out there, they say that pastors, first responders, so pastors, emergency room workers, police officers, firefighters, they tend to be more about helping others in their weakness as opposed to receiving help in weakness. And you may have that dynamic in you. But here's what's interesting about the judged part of me. God created us to live in a state or a posture of confession. Confession. And so when you think of your internal parts and pieces, the normal approach to this is keep it in or diminish the report. Diminish the report. So if we're afraid at a level 8, we might say, well, I'm a little nervous. That's diminishing the report, right? But the idea is if we're built for confession, not confession necessarily of like I'm a horrible person, here's all my sins. Confession of just saying, here's my place right now. Here's what I'm doing and experiencing right now in my life. I'm scared. And this is what I think of when I get scared. You just bring it out. That's what we're talking about when we talk about confession. Why is confession so important in this dynamic of fear and managing your internal world well? Well, it's because God wants us to be, here's another word, integrated. Integrated. Integrated means all the good and the bad parts are working in harmony. We're sinful, we're broken. We all have different aspects of who we are that we like and don't like. And God's okay with that. In fact, I was just talking to somebody this week, not a pastor, and I was just real honest. I'm like, I read the Bible, and aside from the Holy Spirit, I do not want to be with those people in the Bible. Like, if you notice the Old Testament, it's all about people who just mess up, make bad decisions. I mean, David, called the man after God's own heart, he was a murderer and an adulterer. So the integration required for us is to say, I need to confess those parts of me that I don't feel comfortable with. But apparently God is okay working with me even amidst my character structure. That's not necessarily perfect, right? And that's a piece of shame. Shame will come in and say, you're not ready yet because these flaws aren't fixed. So when I go back to when I was asked to come to work here, that was a struggle for me because I was like, what about all this? And the guy who hired me actually said, I don't care. You're all right. You are what we need. And so I was like, all right, if you say so, here I come. And there I was. So, but the key with this integration confession is safety. Safety. So one of the challenges we have as we sort of move through some of these things I'm challenging you in is, and maybe you've done this, you've shared with the person that you probably shouldn't have shared with. And then they responded in a way that just didn't help. You ever done that? You kind of go to somebody and you're trying to be like, I got to figure this out. And there's this pressure inside and you're in a conversation with somebody, maybe at dinner with some friends. And you kind of get into this connection moment with somebody else. But you don't know them well enough to say, I can trust them with this piece. But you feel like you need to trust them. And then you say something and then all of a sudden their eyes go up. Like, what did you just tell me? Right? And their response, just in their face, says it all. You ever had that happen? And then you're like, whoa, your confidence goes away and you learn, okay, I need to be a coward with my feelings and with my challenges. And actually, all you did was you just picked a person that wasn't appropriate. So safety is so important. And the beautiful thing about what you do here is you get time with people every Sunday. And if you're in a small group outside of this setting, you get a time during the week to test who the safe people are and what's going on with you and with them. And so just think about this and think about the idea of if I've got an internal world and there's both the good and the bad sometimes gets in the way, who can I go to and just say, I'm having some pretty weird thoughts about me right now. Can I just share that with you? But then there's external. That's internal. Then there's external. And external can be things like money problems, friendship problems, dating problems, Could be clarity on my purpose. That can be a problem. Again, following God, responding to God's leading. And it can also be things like confidence issues. And so what I want you to think about, though, is this. The internal problems are sort of ground zero in your life. The external problems tend to be symptoms of the internal problems. Somebody who has money issues and is making bad money decisions, if you dig deep enough, you're going to find out they learned something along the way that said they either have to spend more money than they have or they have to make more money than they need. But they've learned something along the way, and that's an internal issue that then manifests in an external issue. And so this is kind of a good example, but I have a cousin. He used to be a baseball player in like high school, and we used to hang out. And he was extremely good as a pitcher. Like he had a fastball that was amazing for a high school kid. And I asked him one time, like, how do you get ready for a game, you know? Because I couldn't throw a ball. I still can't throw a ball very well. I look goofy and gawky, and I can't even teach my daughter how to throw a ball because she laughs at me. So, but anyway, I can throw overhand, but like not a baseball. So you guys remember this old band, Def Leppard? Anybody remember Def Leppard, right? I'm not going to, some of the titles of their songs are very bad, but I used to have their albums, and I used to love their albums, you know. And so he said, this is what I do. An hour before I leave for my game, I lay on my bed, I put headphones on, and I listen to Def Leppard for a solid hour. And that was an internal preparation to get to the game. And that's what I'm talking about, not Def Leppard. Don't listen to Def Leppard. As a pastor, I cannot endorse Def Leppard any longer. I'm not saying I don't have it at home. I'm just saying I can't endorse it here. Just don't do that, right? But his ability to set the tone of his internal world allowed him to go out there and be incredibly good and incredibly aggressive as a pitcher in his baseball games. So let's go to the next question, which is actually back in the discussion questions on that back page again. I'm sorry, I didn't put these in the order I thought I was going to use them. But when have I overreacted to someone or some issue and later realized it? When have I overreacted to someone or some issue and later realized it? And here's why I want to say that. External catastrophizing. You ever catastrophized? Let me define catastrophizing. Catastrophizing is taking a problem like this and making it a problem like this. That's catastrophizing. You amplify reality in the wrong direction. And it actually, you create an argument against yourself for whatever it is. So catastrophizing. External catastrophizing occurs when the internal world is not integrated. Okay? And so this idea of when have I overreacted? Try to find a spot in your memory bank where you did something, you overreacted, and then later on you're like, oh my, it had nothing to do with what I overreacted about. That's what we're digging for. So spend a few minutes on that and we'll come back. 30 seconds. We'll do 30 seconds. All right, let's come back together. And I want to give you 4 words that will help you kind of normalize what may be going on in you if you start to feel afraid. So it's an acrostic. It's called HALT. So you can put HALT. Have you heard this? I'm getting a nod in the audience there. So HALT. A lot of times we overreact, not always because of the internal world. Sometimes it's biological in nature. So HALT stands for hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Yeah. So a part of what can happen in our world is there may be an internal reality, but sometimes it's just like, I'm hungry. I haven't had enough to eat. My daughter, she excels at this. She's 10, and she refuses to eat, which is God's will. Right? So she's sinning. And then, no, I'm kidding. She'll refuse to eat. And then like 30 minutes later, she'll blow up like it's my fault that she's unhappy with her life. And then she'll run upstairs and then she'll scream and slam the door. And anybody ever screamed and slammed the door in here? So a lot of times it's just because she's hungry. Angry refers to where are you coming from before you show up in this moment? What's been going on? Was it a stressful drive? Did you have a bad day or a bad experience right before you showed up? So you're angry. You're carrying residual anger off of something else that's disconnected from that moment. Are you lonely? Have you just not been in connection enough lately to feel like, okay, I can manage this moment because I have people around me that love me? And then are you tired? Did you just not get enough rest, the night before? So the idea is, sometimes you just use that little diagnostic and you can say, okay, it's not this person or this situation. I'm just kind of responding. The problem with that is sometimes we make overreacting or bad decisions. So again, diagnostic can be, is this an ongoing issue or is this just sort of a temporary thing? I want to talk about the aspects of fear, that Roman numeral 1 there. And just for you note takers who like to take really good notes, there's 3 different pieces to this. So get ready, okay? The first one is theological. First one is theological. Fear can sometimes be a sin, but most of the time it's not. Because there are times where fear can actually convince us to make decisions that are sinful. But most of the time, the actual experience of fear is just a part of the human condition. So the idea is sometimes fear will spike us, and then we think we have to, in that moment, make a decision. And that's not really the case. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give you this picture of you will feel fear, that's normal, but you don't need to necessarily immediately squelch it. Sometimes we feel like, oh, this is a bad feeling, I need to push it down so I can kind of forge forward. Sometimes we just need to stop and take a breath, take a moment. So fear is not always a sin. You can't change your feelings immediately. Have you ever tried that? And if you think you have, you're wrong. Because what you've probably done is just pushed it down far enough into your heart that it just sort of simmers. And then later on, you overreact. That can be a key reason why you might overreact. So what is God saying when fear comes up and you're feeling it and you feel like, I need to make this decision, and yet God's saying, actually, I'm saying go this way. What he's saying is, stay on the path. Stay on the path. You guys saw the first Lord of the Rings, right? And the second and the third. And what are they, like 12 hours combined or something? They're really long movies. I don't have time for I watch movies in 15-minute increments. I'm a parent. There's never time for any long movie options. But I remember watching that, and Frodo was always scared. Did you ever notice that? He was never confident. Or if he was, it was only just a few times. And he kept following the path. In fact, Gandalf is convinced he's the guy for the job, and everybody's like, no, he's not. He's kind of a wimp. I mean, he's small. He's not very strong, and he sure doesn't look confident. And yet Gandalf's like, no, he's the one. He's the one. And so he just kept obeying the path. That's the picture that you can put in when you think about this, obey the path. If you want a scripture passage for that, you can write down Isaiah 41:10. Isaiah 41:10. Essentially what God is saying when he says, follow me on this path, he's saying, follow me, I'll handle you and the fear. I'll take care of you, and I'll help you with the fear. And this is what a good parent does when a child's afraid. There are times when, in fact, just this morning, my daughter wanted to be here for her dad, right? She wanted to support him. And I said, well, you can come, but I want you to have a preference. If this isn't your preference, it's okay. But she felt like internal pressure. And so she came up here thinking she needed to be up here with me. And she got a little upset back there. And she goes, I really want to be with my friends. And I said, well, come on, I'll walk down with you and let's go. And that's kind of what God's saying. Like God's saying, you're here, but actually you need to be over here. So come on. And she was a little nervous and shy because she was late, and she felt like she was letting me down, which she wasn't. But she'll find something to criticize me about later if she stays. So, but she wanted to be with her friends. She's 10, so go be with her friends. So that's good. And then number 3, fear results from living a life alone. Living a life alone. The story of Elijah, when he defeated the prophets of Baal, right? If you guys read that story in the Old Testament, after he got done defeating all these prophets and the fire came down on the bull and the bull was wet and everything blew up, everything was awesome, he ran like a marathon after that. And he was out of gas. He didn't go to his friends. He went to hide. He actually had a spike of fear because he had burned his resources out doing all this prophecy thing on the mountain to defeat these priests, prophets, whatever. And God had to attend to him, if you guys read the rest of the story. But he did it alone. And that was dysfunctional. That was not a good, wise decision on his part. I mean, he hadn't even eaten for days. And so we go back to this rhythm, right? If we're doing life alone, there are resources that we can't manufacture inside of ourselves. We need people to give them to us. That's the first one, theological. Second is neurological. Neurological. I love this because I love watching how God created the brain. It's pretty amazing. But if you look at a brain, I'll use my fist. That's kind of what the brain looks like. I mean, it's a very crude representation, but right? So what you have is you have 3 components to the brain. At the very bottom, the brain stem that goes into the spine is called what we call it, the primitive brain or the reptilian brain. And the idea there is it's the brain that operates no matter what we think or say or do. It's automatic. Our heart continues to beat because this reptilian brain is functioning. But that's where life starts. And so if this isn't working, the other 2 parts of the brain are going to be hijacked. So you've got the reptilian brain, and it's making sure all your automatic stuff's working. In fact, if you're driving down the road and you're listening to the radio and you're in that session in your head where you actually lose the have you ever done that? You're driving and you don't see the cars for a little while, but you don't know you're not seeing the cars because you're in your head thinking about something, and then all of a sudden brake lights pop up ahead of you. That's the reptilian brain saying, yo, car wreck coming, and then you hit your brakes and hopefully everything's fine. But that's the reptilian brain sending off a warning that you're somewhere else, you need to come back to your car. That's reptilian. Then you go to the amygdala, and it's also called the mammalian brain. But the idea with the amygdala, that's all the emotions. That's where the emotions live. So think about it. If you're safe physically, then your body says, well, how are your emotions? If you feel safe, you're going to be in a more positive space. If you don't feel safe, you're going to go to more of the intense, I guess, darker emotions, intense emotions. That's your amygdala. Then you get into your cortex and then your prefrontal cortex. Those are connected. That's one thing. But the prefrontal cortex has to do with all of your logic and reasoning. So follow this thinking that God put together. Make sure everything's running right. Make sure your emotions are in check so that you can think clearly. Right? So you've got fear going on, whatever that is, and if you're not processing it with someone or some group, even if you feel like it's not really that big of a deal, if you just say it out loud, God has designed the brain in such a way where if your brain knows that other people are with you in that moment, your brain actually begins to calm down, the emotions get reintegrated, and then you can think more clearly. You may have had a time when that happened in your life where you came in and you felt like you had this catastrophizing situation going on. You had a conversation and it just shrunk in your heart and the intensity went down. Your nerves settled. That's how God created the brain. It's amazing, but you have to do it with other people. That's the neurological. And then we go to the functional. And you guys remember in math, the bell curve? Or do you remember when you were in school and they would grade on the curve? I loved grading on the curve. I was always at the lower sort of bottom part of the curve. But when we graded on the curve, my grade went up. I felt so smart because everybody else weren't smart enough. I don't know, something. But I loved how my grade was like, it's not a C anymore, it's a C+. I'm so smart, this is great. But you got the bell-shaped curve. And so if you look here, you'll see I've written the curve. And then on the bottom of kind of the level point of the curve, when the curve begins and ends, it says no fear. And then it goes up and you'll see those two brackets. And then it says appropriate fear. And then a broken dotted line there. And then it goes into high fear. And so the idea is there are gradations to fear that I want you to see. And the bell curve is basically helping us understand where do we need to be. We need to be in that appropriate fear space between those two brackets. We cannot live without fear. But in community, with other people, when our relationship with God is moving forward, we can live with appropriate fear. We will feel it. But what we are able to do in appropriate fear is we're able to see it for what it is, not for what it feels like it is. We stay in our cortex that I was just talking about. And so this gives you a nice visual, because if you go into high fear, chances are whatever's going on is not realistic. And God is a God of reality. So this is a great way for you to kind of just check yourself on some of these fears. Is it high? Well, if it's high, then I probably need to talk with some people and get out of my amygdala, my emotional brain, come back down to appropriate fear, and then I'll look at it and see it for what it is. I also want to give you 4 words that tend to show up when we feel fear. And this goes again to the neurological. There's 4 Fs. 4 Fs. The first F is fight. Second F is flight, like you go for a flight in an airplane. So fight, you're going to get into a fight with somebody. Flight, and then freeze or fold. 1, 2, 3, 4. Fight, flight, freeze, or fold. And the idea with those words there, that's typically how we're going to respond to fear. How do you do it? It may vary depending on the situation, but sometimes we feel like we got to fight. Early in my marriage, I was a fighter, and my wife was like, "Why are you so angry? I don't know. Why are you coming at me with all your anger, weirdo?" This was not a part of the dating relationship promises we made, but I would get like intimidated, and so I'd feel like, well, I got to defend myself, you know. But then you've got flight, which is the idea of running away from a problem. You've got freeze. Freeze means you just lock up. Maybe some of you have had that expression. I locked up on that telephone pole. I'm like, this isn't happening. I just froze. And then fold it comes from the games where you're playing like poker or card game, and you fold. I fold, I'm out. You just give up. And so as you're navigating fear, you might ask yourself, am I wanting to do one of these 4 things? That's a great indicator that you're probably in the high fear zone. And then you can begin to navigate that appropriately. All right. So I want to quickly, because we're starting to run out of time here, I want to go to the 4 Fs. There's that question. Of the 4 Fs, which one do I navigate to when fear arrives? What is the cost of this? So quickly, we'll do this just for about a minute. A few of you just be bold and step up and say, here's where I typically go to. Maybe give a quick example of what that is, and we'll come right back. Okay, 30 seconds. Ten seconds. 10 seconds. All right, we can come back together. For the next 2 sections, we're going to move a little fast because I want to make sure we get to the skills. So we have leadership and fear, number 2, and then issues, number 3, and then we'll jump into skills to kind of bring this to a close. Leadership and fear. First of all, I just want to move 2 words kind of in the way of your thinking. There's a difference between risking fear and gambling fear. Those are really good words to use. And risk, the idea there is appropriate risk. So when people start a business and they get people around them, there's no guarantee that whatever that business is going to last. In fact, if you think about Amazon, Jeff has told the story many times. Not a big fan of him, but I've studied some of his business things. And he said everybody was telling him, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work. But he kept watching the fundamentals, meaning what his business was doing and where it was headed, and all the fundamentals were pointing up. And so he just stuck with it. But Amazon wasn't known and was kind of ignored for a long time, and then one day all of a sudden everybody's using Amazon. And he stuck with it even though all of his advisors were saying, dump this thing, get rid of it. But he didn't know that for sure starting out. So there was an appropriate risk he took. It wasn't necessarily a gamble. Gambling is kind of that fight, flight, freeze, or fold. I'm just going to throw everything out there and see if something works. You hear about people in the stock market who gamble their life savings or their retirement, and all of a sudden they're broke because they just gambled. That's not what we're talking about when we talk about moving ahead in fear. We're saying, pay attention to the risk. If it's a gamble, that's not where God lives. He's not asking you to just throw a Hail Mary maybe. He's saying, no, I'm going to bring people around you, bring opportunities around you, but you have to commit. That's where the fear piece happens. And there's times when, even when you commit, you're like, I don't really know how this is going to work out. And that's a part of the faith journey. So the idea is appropriate risk, calculated risk is another way to say that. Calculated, well thought out. You've considered the cost. Remember, Jesus said that. But the gamble piece is more impulsive. That's when you go in and you're like, I'm going to buy the Toyota. What's the cheapest Toyota that they make right now? Civic? Is the Civic still? What is it? Civic. Oh, Civic. What does Toyota make that's cheap? Corolla. Okay, thank you. I drive a Prius. I don't know if they're any good, but so you got the Corolla, right? You go in. I'm going to buy a Corolla, and I'm just going to get the basic package, and you walk out with like a Lexus. That's a gamble, right? You have been impulsive. And that's a part of what can happen when we get afraid. Well, I got to do something. So, but I've got FOMO, right? I'm afraid I'm going to miss out on the air-conditioned seats and the wood-ingrained dashboard and the self-driving, whatever. And so you just, and that's impulsive. So that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about well thought out, meaning you have lots of conversations with other people. And then next, you get to issues. Issues, there's 2 pieces. One is fear of the unexperienced, not inexperienced, unexperienced. Unexperienced, meaning you haven't experienced this yet. So how in the world can you draw a conclusion off something you've never experienced? And here's the key. Nobody else who may have experienced something similar can tell you what your experience is going to be. They just can't. That's why you need safe people. Wise advisors who understand there's a God component to all of this. You're feeling fear, and yet, here's this and this and this and this. Here's what God is doing. Here's the environment God is creating for you to make this decision in. And the fear piece, yes, is coming on, but can we get it down from high down to appropriate? Meaning maybe it's just a part of your relationship with God where you don't trust Him. Now that's worth looking at. But the fear may be the symptom of you saying, I don't trust God enough. And He's saying, that's exactly why I'm asking you to confront whatever this fear is. Inexperience. Now, here's a beautiful thing. As you get into your experience, you naturally fear less. I used to be terrified of the phone. I was in sales for a number of years. You can't be a salesman and be afraid of the phone. You just can't. But what I found out was I'd make a call terrified, do horrible, hang up, make the next call not as terrified, lose that sale, hang up. But after 5 or 6 calls, all of a sudden I was in my rhythm and I could do it okay. But that's because I experienced enough of what I needed to do. Fear of the unexperienced. And then the second thing I want to talk about here is failing. Failing, meaning, and that kind of goes to catastrophizing. When God is saying, hey, go do this, what we can go to is, I don't want to mess this up. I don't want to fail. And that goes to perfectionism, which is actually not a part of the human condition. They can't be perfect. But shame, that inner voice of shame that we all carry that convinces us not to do the great things that God's asking us to do, tries to convince us, no, you're not ready yet. You're not perfect. You got to be perfect. So this idea of failing, it's not failing, because people fail all the time. It's fear of failing. So pay attention to that. We're going to skip this question that we were going to do. Which of these issues has affected your own? Now, I put leadership there because a part of what I wanted to challenge you in is your leadership journey and how has it shown up. We'll skip that because I want to take the time for skills before we end. So a few different skills, real easy. One is self-inquiry. Self-inquiry. And self-inquiry can only happen after we get out of the high fear. So you can't do self-inquiry until you're back into your prefrontal cortex. You're calm. You're acknowledging that you're afraid, but the fear isn't messing with your internal system. The shakes in your hands are going away. The sweat is going away. The hot flash in your face is going away. All these different things that may show up physically, they're all calm. You're okay. You've been heard. And so you begin to look at this idea of just reflection. And the second thing is ID. Okay, this is a 4-word thing. So ID means identification. That's one. ID. Second is connect. Third is reality. And fourth is act. ID, 1. Connect, 2. Reality, 3. And act, 4. If this was an acrostic, it would say ICRA, but I don't know if that sounds like a real word, so we won't use that. But ICRA is what you can do. So the idea is you identify the fear. You kind of move it away from you. You put it on the metaphorical table of your life, and you say, that's my fear. Then you connect with other people about the fear. So here's what's going on, you say. Something's going on, and I'm kind of sensing this about my life, but I'm afraid. So could we talk about this a little bit? You connect, then you get back to reality. We talk about catastrophizing, high fear. That goes back down like a balloon, losing air after you've connected, and so you can begin to live in reality. Well, the worst case scenario is this. The best case scenario is this. Okay, now I know kind of what I'm looking at. And then you act. Then you act. Most of us tend to act, then identify, then connect, and then we get back in reality and it's like, oh no, I made the wrong decision. So you start with identify, then connect. Let's see, that's that. And that actually goes back to the passage that we were talking about, follow the path. Follow the path. Don't rush through the path. Slow it down. Identify it. Connect. Take some time. There's never not enough time with God. There's never not enough time. And fear can speed us up. So the idea is slow it down, work this process, and then you'll begin to sense where God is saying, here's what you should do. And then the second thing is, real simple, the 24-hour rule. The 24-hour rule. Meaning don't ever make a decision that you feel compelled to make until you've given it 24 hours and you've worked that process. So all of this, coming back to the beginning of our talk, what are you afraid of? And it doesn't have to be one overarching fear. Maybe it's what makes you afraid. What comes up rhythmically in your life where you find that fear just naturally becomes your companion. In fact, it becomes your companion, your advisor, your parent, and your boss, all in one. And it's telling you and dominating you and trying to convince you that whatever the fear piece is, you need to make a decision that is different than what God is leading you in. I hope what you're getting this morning allows you and the Holy Spirit and your community to begin to navigate fear in such a way that you do it in God's timing, in His will, and you get that clarity you need about what's the difference between what I'm afraid of and what path is God asking me to walk. So let me close this out and we'll be done for this morning. God, thank you again